Greetings and welcome back to Mythic Memoirs, where we bring you the most fascinating and bone-chilling true crime stories from around the world. As always, we've scoured the archives to bring you a tale that will leave you on the edge of your seat, so sit back, relax, and get ready to be transported into the dark and twisted world of true crime. On April 15, 2013, the Boston Marathon was rocked by two explosions near the finish line. The bombs killed 3 people and injured hundreds more, sending shockwaves across the country. In the aftermath of the attack, a manhunt began for the perpetrators, leading to a tense standoff with police and the eventual capture of one of the suspects, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. In the following chapters, we will explore the events surrounding the Boston Marathon bombing, the manhunt for the Tsarnaev brothers, and the impact of the attack on the city of Boston and the nation as a whole. We will also examine the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and the legal proceedings that followed. Through the stories of survivors, first responders, and law enforcement officials, we will see how the city of Boston came together in the wake of tragedy, and how a community refused to be broken by terror. And we will see how, through perseverance and resilience, justice was ultimately served for the victims of one of the most devastating attacks in recent history. On April 15, 2013, the city of Boston was rocked by a devastating attack during one of its most beloved events, the Boston Marathon. At approximately 2:49 p.m., 2 bombs were detonated near the finish line of the marathon, causing chaos, destruction, and death. The explosions killed 3 people and injured more than 260 others, many of whom suffered serious and life-changing injuries. The victims included marathon spectators, participants, and volunteers, as well as innocent bystanders who happened to be in the area. The immediate aftermath of the attack was chaotic and confusing. People were running in all directions, trying to find safety and help for those who were injured. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, working tirelessly to triage the wounded and transport them to nearby hospitals. The streets were filled with debris, shrapnel, and blood. As the dust settled, the true horror of the attack became clear. The bombs had been planted in backpacks near the finish line, and they had been timed to explode when the most people were present. The explosions were devastating, and the carnage was shocking. The city of Boston was in shock and mourning, but it quickly rallied together in a show of strength and resilience. People from all walks of life came together to support the victims and their families, and to honor the bravery of the first responders who had rushed into danger to help. In the following chapters, we will delve deeper into the Boston Marathon bombing and its aftermath. We will explore the investigation into the attack, the manhunt for the perpetrators, and the eventual capture and trial of those responsible. We will also look at the impact that the attack had on the city of Boston, and how it changed the way that Americans think about terrorism and public safety. After the Boston Marathon bombing, law enforcement agencies went into full gear to track down those responsible for the deadly attack. The FBI immediately began their investigation, reviewing surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses to piece together what happened. The focus quickly turned to 2 brothers, Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who were identified through the surveillance footage. As authorities closed in on the suspects, the Tsarnaev brothers began a desperate attempt to escape, leading police on a high-speed chase through the streets of Watertown, Massachusetts. The ensuing manhunt lasted for hours, as law enforcement officials scoured the area for the suspects. The city of Boston was put on lockdown, with residents being advised to stay inside and businesses closing their doors. The search eventually led to a standoff in a residential neighborhood, where Tamerlan Tsarnaev was killed in a shootout with police. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev managed to escape, but he was eventually found hiding in a boat in a backyard in Watertown. He was apprehended and taken into custody, bringing an end to the manhunt that had gripped the nation. In the aftermath of the manhunt, questions were raised about how the Tsarnaev brothers were able to carry out such a deadly attack, and how they were able to evade capture for so long. The investigation would continue for months, as authorities worked to uncover the full extent of the plot and any potential accomplices. The manhunt for the Tsarnaev brothers was a defining moment in the history of law enforcement in the United States. It demonstrated the tireless dedication and commitment of law enforcement officials to protect the public, and it showed the power of the community in coming together to support one another in times of crisis. The manhunt was a reminder that, even in the darkest of moments, there is always hope for justice and a brighter future. On April 19, 2013, the manhunt for the Boston Marathon bombers finally came to an end with the capture of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. It was a dramatic moment that brought a sense of relief and closure to the city of Boston, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter in the story of the bombing. In this chapter, we will explore the events leading up to the capture of Tsarnaev and the intense manhunt that ensued. We will see how law enforcement worked tirelessly to track down the suspect, using a combination of technology, intelligence, and old-fashioned detective work. As the search for Tsarnaev intensified, the city of Boston was put on lockdown, with residents ordered to stay inside while law enforcement combed the streets in search of the suspect. It was a tense and frightening time, with the entire city holding its breath as the manhunt unfolded. And then, finally, came the breakthrough. A homeowner in the suburb of Watertown noticed something suspicious in his backyard, a blood trail leading to a boat that was parked in his yard. The boat's tarp had been lifted, and there was movement inside. What followed was a dramatic standoff between Tsarnaev and law enforcement, as police surrounded the boat and negotiated with the suspect. After several hours of tense negotiations, Tsarnaev was finally apprehended and taken into custody. The capture of Tsarnaev was a moment of triumph for law enforcement, but it was also a time for reflection and healing for the city of Boston. The bombing had shaken the city to its core, but the capture of the suspect brought a sense of closure and a renewed sense of resilience. As the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev began, the nation held its breath. The man responsible for the devastating Boston Marathon bombing was finally facing justice, and the world was watching closely to see how the trial would play out. The prosecution argued that Tsarnaev was a cold and calculating terrorist who sought to inflict maximum damage and chaos on innocent civilians. They presented evidence showing how he and his brother Tamerlan had planned and carried out the bombing, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds more. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Tsarnaev was a confused and impressionable young man who had been influenced by his radicalized older brother. They pointed to evidence of Tamerlan's extremist views and argued that Dzhokhar had been drawn into his brother's twisted ideology. As the trial progressed, emotions ran high on both sides. The prosecution called survivors and family members of victims to the stand, bringing tears to the eyes of many in the courtroom. The defense, meanwhile, tried to humanize Tsarnaev, painting him as a lost and vulnerable young man who had been led astray by his brother's influence. Ultimately, the jury found Tsarnaev guilty on all 30 counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and aiding and abetting. The trial then moved into the sentencing phase, with the prosecution pushing for the death penalty and the defense arguing for life in prison. After weeks of intense arguments, the jury ultimately sentenced Tsarnaev to death by lethal injection. It was a controversial decision, with many questioning whether it was the right choice. But for the families of the victims, it brought a sense of closure and justice. The trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was a sobering reminder of the very real threat of terrorism in the world today. It showed how quickly and devastatingly innocent lives can be destroyed by those who seek to spread fear and chaos. But it also showed the resilience and strength of the human spirit, as the people of Boston and the nation as a whole came together in the wake of tragedy to stand united against hate and violence. The Boston Marathon bombing had a profound impact on the city of Boston and the entire nation. The aftermath of the attack was marked by mourning and a renewed sense of unity, as people came together to support each other and honor the victims. In the weeks and months following the attack, the city of Boston came together to heal and to honor those who were lost or injured. The city held vigils and memorials, and the Red Sox even wore special jerseys with the words "Boston Strong" on them to show their support. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was eventually convicted and sentenced to death. The trial was emotional and controversial, with many people arguing that the death penalty was not the right punishment for Tsarnaev's crimes. The aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing also had a profound impact on security measures across the nation. Airports, train stations, and other public places increased security measures to prevent future attacks. The attack also led to the development of new technologies and strategies to prevent and respond to acts of terrorism. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the Boston Marathon bombing was the spirit of resilience and unity that emerged in its aftermath. The people of Boston and the nation as a whole came together in a time of tragedy to support one another, and to show that we will not be defeated by acts of terror. As we reflect on the Boston Marathon bombing and its aftermath, we remember the lives lost and the heroes who emerged in the face of tragedy. And we continue to honor their memory by standing together and remaining vigilant against acts of terrorism. The Boston Marathon bombing left a lasting impact on the city of Boston and the world at large. In this chapter, we will explore the legacy of the attack and how it has shaped the way we think about terrorism and security. One of the most immediate legacies of the bombing was the increased security measures put in place at public events and transportation hubs. The attack exposed vulnerabilities in our security systems and prompted a re-evaluation of how we protect our public spaces. The bombing also had a profound impact on the victims and their families. Survivors and families of the deceased continue to deal with the physical and emotional scars of the attack, while also working to rebuild their lives. But the legacy of the Boston Marathon bombing also includes the bravery and resilience of the city and its people. Bostonians came together in the wake of the attack to support one another and honor the victims. The phrase "Boston Strong" became a rallying cry for the city, symbolizing its ability to overcome adversity and unite in the face of tragedy. The legacy of the Boston Marathon bombing extends beyond just the city of Boston. The attack served as a stark reminder of the ongoing threat of terrorism and the need for continued vigilance in the fight against extremism. In the years since the attack, the Boston Marathon has become a symbol of resilience and perseverance. Runners from all over the world continue to participate in the race, honoring the victims and showing that they will not be deterred by acts of terror. While the scars of the Boston Marathon bombing will never fully heal, the city and its people have shown that they are determined to move forward and not be defined by the tragedy. The legacy of the attack will continue to shape our understanding of terrorism and the importance of community in times of crisis. The Boston Marathon bombing was a tragic event that shook the nation to its core. It was a senseless act of violence that resulted in the loss of innocent lives and left many others injured. However, in the face of such devastation, we saw the best of humanity. First responders, law enforcement, and ordinary citizens came together to help those in need and to bring the perpetrators to justice. In this series, we have explored the events of the Boston Marathon bombing, the manhunt that followed, and the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. We have seen the bravery and resilience of the people of Boston and how they came together to heal and rebuild after such a devastating event. We have also seen how justice was served through the conviction and sentencing of Tsarnaev. But even with the trial over, the impact of the Boston Marathon bombing continues to be felt. The survivors and their families continue to face physical and emotional challenges, and the memory of those lost will never be forgotten. It is important to remember the Boston Marathon bombing not only as a tragedy but as a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. We must continue to come together in times of crisis, support one another, and work towards a better, safer future for all. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the tragic events of the Boston Marathon bombing. We have explored the devastating attack, the intense manhunt that followed, the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, and the aftermath and impact of the bombing on the city of Boston and the nation as a whole. I hope that you have gained a deeper understanding of the events and the resilience and strength of the people of Boston. If you found this video informative and thought-provoking, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more content like this. I would love to hear your thoughts on the Boston Marathon bombing and its aftermath. How do you think the city of Boston has changed since the attack? Do you think justice was served in the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.